Chapter 1. Sold into Chains. The last embers of autumn glowed across the horizon as the village of Leora braced itself against hunger. Smoke curled upward from crooked chimneys, thin and weak, for there was little wood to burn. Children sat barefoot on thresholds, gnawing at scraps of bread, while mothers drew water with faces worn hollow by worry. In a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of the forest, Ilara pressed a damp cloth to her father's brow. "Rest, father," she whispered. "I'll fetch herbs tomorrow. You'll feel better." Her father, Marcellus, tried to smile, but pain etched deep lines across his face. Once, he had been a strong quarryman, known for carving great stone pillars for the Lord's hall. Now, a crushed leg from a work accident had left him crippled, unable to labor. The debts had grown like weeds in a neglected field. "Ilara," he rasped, gripping her hand. "You've done enough. You shouldn't have to carry all this burden alone." Her chest tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "We'll find a way. We always do." Before he could answer, the sound of hooves thundered outside. A knock, heavy as doom, shook the cottage door. Marcellus went pale. "They've come." Ilara's heart pounded. She knew who it must be. The door slammed open, and the figure who entered seemed to bring the storm itself. Bram, the debt collector, filled the doorway. His broad shoulders nearly scraped the frame, his leather cloak dripping with rain, his beard matted like a beast's mane. "Ilara, Marcellus," Bram said, voice low and cruel. "The Lord grows impatient. Your debts are long overdue." Marcellus struggled to rise on his crutch. "Please, Bram, just a little more time." "Time!" Bram barked a laugh, spittle flying. "The Lord is no beggar. Coin is what's owed. Coin is what must be paid. And coin you have none." Ilara felt the air grow colder as Bram's gaze shifted to her. His eyes, small and greedy, ran over her form like a butcher sizing meat. "But perhaps payment can be taken in another form." Her stomach dropped. She understood instantly. Marcellus slammed his crutch down. "No, not her. She is all I have left." Bram sneered. "What use are you? A broken man with nothing to offer. The palace is always in need of maids, strong young girls. She'll serve and the debt will be forgiven." Ilara's breath caught. The palace. She had heard the whispers. Endless corridors of marble. Nobles who looked at servants as though they were dirt. Women sold into labor never to be seen again. "No," Marcellus begged, sinking to his knees. "Take me instead. I'll scrub the palace floors on my hands." Bram shoved him back with one hand. "You'd collapse in an hour. The girl goes, unless you have the coin now." Silence. The fire crackled weakly. Ilara's hands trembled, but she stepped forward, her heart heavy with dread and determination. "I will go." Marcellus turned on her, horror etched in every line of his face. "Ilara, no." She met his gaze, forcing strength into her voice, though her throat burned. "If it ends your suffering, if it clears the debt, then let me go. Father, you've given enough for me. Let me do this for you." Tears welled in his eyes. "You don't know what you're giving up." "I know enough," she whispered. "I'll endure." Bram grinned, satisfied. "Good girl. At dawn, you leave." That night, the cottage was silent but for the wind pressing against the shutters. Ilara packed her few belongings, her mother's shawl, worn soft with age, a wooden comb her father had carved, and a ribbon she had once worn in her hair as a child. Her father sat by the fire, his face shadowed. "I've failed you," he murmured. Ilara knelt beside him, taking his calloused hands in hers. "No, father, You gave me love when we had nothing else. That is not failure. He kissed her forehead, his tears falling into her hair. Come back to me, Elara. Promise me you'll come back. She pressed her face against his chest. I promise. But even as she spoke, her heart knew the palace was a world that devoured promises whole. At dawn, Bram returned with a cart drawn by weary horses. Elara embraced her father one last time. His embrace was fierce, desperate, as though he could anchor her there forever. Never forget me, he whispered. Never. She swore, her own tears soaking his tunic, and then she climbed into the cart. With every jolt of the wheels, the cottage, her father, her village, everything she had ever known faded into distance. The road was cruel. Rain fell in sheets, soaking her through. Bram offered no kindness, only gruff commands. At night, when he and his men drank by the fire, Elara sat apart, clutching her mother's shawl and staring at the stars. Do you see me, father? She thought. Do you still believe I'll return? On the third day, the capital rose before them. It was like stepping into another world. White towers pierced the clouds, banners of crimson and gold snapped in the wind, and gates of black iron stretched higher than any tree. Carved lions stood guard, their stone eyes fierce. Elara's breath caught, fear coiled in her stomach. This was no place for her, yet this was to be her prison. Bram led her to the servants' gate, where Mistress Thalia awaited. She was a woman carved of sharp angles, her hair pulled so tightly back that it seemed to stretch her skin, her eyes sharp as daggers. "This is the girl?" Thalia asked, voice dripping with disdain. "She'll do," Bram muttered, handing over a scroll. Thalia's gaze swept over Elara like a cold draught. "Fragile, but you'll learn. Listen well, girl. Here, you are nothing. You rise before dawn. Work until your hands bleed, and speak only when spoken to. Fail, and you will wish you had never been born. Do you understand?" Elara lowered her head. "Yes, mistress." And so her life as a palace maid began. The palace was a labyrinth of endless corridors, polished marble floors, ceilings painted with gold-leaf stars. Servants scurried like shadows, silent and unseen, while nobles swept past in silks and jewels. Elara's tasks were relentless, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, carrying water so heavy her shoulders burned, polishing silver until her reflection stared back. The other maids whispered when she passed, "She's the debt girl. Her father sold her. Best keep away from her. Bad luck." She kept her head down, lips sealed, swallowing every cruel word like bitter medicine. At night, in the cramped servants' quarters, she lay awake, her body bruised with exhaustion. She clutched her mother's shawl and whispered into the darkness, "I will endure." Weeks later came the night that would change everything. The great hall blazed with thousands of candles, chandeliers glittering like stars. Nobles in silk and velvet crowded the tables, their jewels flashing, their laughter sharp. Elara was assigned to serve wine. Her hands trembled as she carried the heavy tray into the hall, her eyes fixed on the polished floor. But when she reached the high table, her breath caught. There, beneath a canopy of golden lions, sat the royal family, and among them, his presence commanding the room though he sat in silence. Crown Prince Kyle, she had heard whispers of him, a warrior prince, cold and distant, admired and feared in equal measure. His hair was dark as midnight, his eyes a piercing steel grey that seemed to see everything. Elara dared not meet his gaze. She bent to place goblets before the nobles, but as she leaned forward, her sleeve brushed against a man's hand. The tray wobbled, wine sloshed dangerously. "You clumsy wretch!" the noble snarled, raising his hand to strike her. Elara flinched, bracing for the blow. "Enough!" The voice cut through the hall like a blade. All eyes turned. The noble froze, paling. Ilara's heart thundered as she dared a glance upward. Prince Kyle's gaze was fixed on her, unyielding, cold, yet in his steel-grey eyes flickered something else, something unreadable. "She is a maid," Kyle said, his voice low but carrying through the hall. "Not a whipping post." The noble lowered his hand at once, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, forgive me." Kale's eyes lingered on Elara for a heartbeat longer before he turned away. "See that the wine is served without further incident." Elara's chest burned as she hurriedly set down the goblets. Her hands still trembled, but it was no longer from fear alone. Why had he defended her? As she left the hall, she felt his gaze follow her, and for the first time in her life, Elara's heart beat not with dread, but with something far more dangerous. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Palace. The palace never truly slept. Even in the dead of night, its marble corridors hummed with the distant echo of footsteps, the flutter of banners in the wind, the soft murmur of guards stationed at every arch. For Elara, the rhythm of palace life was relentless. Dawn came long before the sun, and her days were a blur of labor, hauling buckets of water, scrubbing floors that shone only to be dirtied again, polishing endless goblets of silver and gold. But the worst of it was not the work itself. It was the way the other servants looked at her. "The debt girl," they whispered when she passed. "The one her father sold. Best stay clear of her. Bad luck." At first, Elara tried to ignore them. She had always endured. But whispers grew sharper, sneers bolder. In the servants' quarters, no one saved her a place by the fire. At meals, her bread was stolen, her water spilled, and always there were the stares, curious, cruel, as if she were a stain upon their world. Elara said nothing. She simply bent her head and worked. But at night, when exhaustion pressed heavy, she clutched her mother's shawl beneath her thin blanket and wondered if she would ever feel warmth again. One grey morning, Mistress Thalia summoned her. "Elara!" the woman snapped, her eyes narrowing. "The prince's steward has complained that the royal library is in disarray. You will be reassigned there?" Elara blinked, startled. "The library, mistress?" "Yes. Dust every shelf, polish the tables, scrub the floors until they shine. If a single cobweb remains, I'll have you whipped." Elara lowered her gaze. "Yes, mistress." Inside, however, a spark of something stirred. She had never seen a library, not even in her village. Books were treasures of nobles and priests, rarer than gold. What would it be like to walk among them? That afternoon, she followed a steward through winding corridors until the scent of parchment and old wood filled the air. When the doors opened, Elara's breath caught. The library was a cathedral of knowledge. Shelves soared toward vaulted ceilings painted with constellations decorations, ladders climbing into dizzying heights. Tables of carved oak gleamed beneath pools of golden light cast by stained glass windows. Dust motes danced in the beams like stars adrift. She could only stare, awed. The steward snorted, "Don't gape, girl. Get to work." Hours slipped past as Alara dusted shelves and swept marble floors. The air smelled of ink and candle wax, a quiet sanctuary compared to the noise of the servant halls. For the first time since arriving, she felt a small measure of peace. Her fingers lingered on the spine of a book, tracing faded letters. She did not know the words, but her heart ached with longing. What secrets were locked within these pages? Stories, histories, dreams, worlds she would never be allowed to touch. "You're lingering." The voice was cool, deep, and startlingly close. Alara spun, her heart leaping. Prince Kyle stood only a few steps away. He was taller than she remembered from the feast, broad-shouldered in a dark tunic embroidered with the lion crest. His steel-gray eyes regarded her with the same intensity that had silenced the hall weeks ago. Alara dropped into a hurried curtsy, her cheeks burning. "Your Highness, I meant no disrespect." Kyle's gaze flicked to the shelf she had been touching, then back to her. "Do you read?" Her throat tightened. "No, Highness." For a long moment he studied her in silence. She felt pinned beneath his gaze, as though he could see every secret thought she held. Finally he said, "Curiosity is not a crime." Alara blinked, startled. "No, my lord. Continue your work." And just like that he turned and strode away, his cloak whispering across the marble. Alara pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Why had he spoken to her? Why had his words, so simple, so cold, felt like a spark in the dark? Later that week, as Alara carried a bucket down a corridor, she nearly collided with a woman descending the grand staircase. The woman was striking, golden hair coiled in elaborate braids, gown of emerald silk sweeping the floor, jewels glittering at her throat. Her beauty was sharp, dangerous, like sunlight on a blade. "Watch where you walk, girl," the woman snapped, her voice laced with disdain. Alara dropped into a bow. "Forgive me, my lady." The woman's eyes narrowed, assessing her like one might a stray dog. "You're the new maid, aren't you? The debt girl?" Alara's stomach clenched, but she kept her head low. "Yes, my lady." The woman's lips curved in a cold smile. "You'd do well to remember your place. The prince's attention is not for the likes of you." Before Alara could reply, the woman swept past, her perfume lingering like poison. It was only after she vanished that Alara dared ask another maid who she was. "That is Lady Seraphine," the maid whispered, eyes wide. "She is favored by the queen herself. Some say she will be the future princess." Alara's heart sank. Future princess? Of course. What had she expected? That a prince's brief glance, his few words, could mean anything? She shook the thought away. It was foolishness, dangerous foolishness. Winter's first frost painted the palace gardens silver when word spread. The festival of stars was approaching. Once a year, nobles gathered to honor the kingdom's founding, feasting beneath lanterns strung like constellations. For servants, it meant endless work. Alara was assigned to tend the outer hall. She moved among tables laden with food, careful and silent. Nobles laughed, their voices rising above the music of lutes and harps. But whispers cut through the merriment. "Is that her, the debt girl? They say the prince spoke to her in the library." "Nonsense. Why would he waste words on a servant? Heat crept up Ilara's neck. She kept her head bowed, focusing on her task. But then, "Mind your step, girl!" A noblewoman deliberately shifted, sending her goblet tumbling. Red wine splashed across the floor and onto Ilara's skirts. Laughter erupted. "Clumsy thing," the woman sneered. "Clean it up before the stench spreads." Ilara dropped to her knees, scrubbing furiously, her face burning with humiliation. And then silence fell. A presence loomed. Shadows shifted. Slowly, Ilara dared to look up. Prince Kyle stood above them, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept from the sneering noblewoman to Ilara on the floor. "Who spilled the wine?" he asked, voice calm but dangerous. The noblewoman paled. It was." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "You would humiliate a servant for your amusement?" "My prince, Enough," Kyle said, his tone final. He turned to Ilara, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes softened. "Rise." Ilara's breath caught, hands trembling. She obeyed. The hall was silent, all eyes upon them. Kyle addressed the nobles, his voice carrying, "She serves in my hall, and while she does, she will not be treated as a toy for your cruelty. Remember that." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The noblewoman bowed hastily, retreating. Ilara stood frozen, her cheeks burning, her heart racing so wildly she thought it might betray her. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the shadows, but she could feel every stare, every whisper, and most of all, his gaze still lingering on her. That night, as lanterns floated into the sky, like stars reborn, Ilara lay awake in her narrow cot. Why, she wondered, why does he defend me? And though she tried to dismiss it, her heart whispered a dangerous truth. Because he sees you. Chapter 3. The Festival of Stars. The palace of Dorianth had never glittered so brightly. Lanterns floated in the air like captive stars, their golden light spilling over the marble courtyards and arched balconies. The Festival of Stars came but once a year, when nobles and commoners alike gathered to celebrate the night the gods had blessed the kingdom with peace. Musicians played beneath silken banners, the scent of roasted meats and sugared almonds hung in the air, and laughter echoed like bells across the sprawling gardens. But for Ilara, it was no celebration. She clutched the silver tray tighter in her hands, weaving through the crowd of silk-gowned ladies and jeweled lords. A plain servant's dress felt like burlap against the sheen of velvet and brocade. Her only task was to pour wine, refill goblets, and remain unseen, yet eyes followed her, not because she was beautiful, though she was in a quiet, understated way, but because she was out of place. She did not belong in this world of diamonds and gold, and she knew it. "Ilara," another maid hissed, thrusting a basket of fruit into her hands. "To the high table, now." Ilara nodded and hurried toward the raised dais where the royal family sat. The queen glittered in sapphires. The king's golden circlet gleamed in the torchlight, and at the center sat Prince Kyle. Her steps faltered. He looked different tonight, not just regal, but alive, bathed in the firelight of 100 lanterns. His dark hair caught the glow, his sharp jaw softened by a rare smile. He was listening to a foreign ambassador, but as though sensing her presence, his gaze flicked toward her. Their eyes met. Ilara's breath caught, her heart stuttering in her chest. She quickly dropped her gaze trays and placed the basket before the table, retreating with a low curtsy, but not before she felt the weight of his attention lingering on her. She moved on, tray in hand, approaching a group of laughing noblewomen at the edge of the courtyard. One of them, Lady Varenne, reached for a goblet but paused, eyes narrowing on Elara. "Well, well," Varenne drawled loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "If it isn't the festival's most unlikely guest, the debt girl." Elara froze. A hush fell over the small circle. Varenne smirked, tilting her head. "Tell me, girl, how does it feel to serve the very people who own your family's shame? Perhaps you should be grateful. At least you wear palace rags now, instead of village mud." Laughter rippled cruelly through the crowd. Alara's cheeks burned. She bowed her head, clutching the tray until her knuckles whitened. "I meant no offense, my lady," she whispered. "No offense?" Varenne arched a brow. "Your very existence offends. Do you think we have not noticed how boldly you linger near the prince, like a moth circling a flame?" Gasps, murmurs, a spark catching dry leaves. Elara's heart pounded. She shook her head desperately. "I would never—" "Enough!" The single word cut through the night like a blade. The crowd parted as Crown Prince Kyle strode forward, his expression thunderous. All laughter died, every whisper swallowed by the sudden hush. He stopped beside Elara, his presence towering, his voice cold. "Lady Varenne," his eyes, sharp as steel, locked on the noblewoman. "You shame yourself." Varenne's painted lips parted in shock. "Your Highness, I was only what?" Kyle's voice dropped, quiet but deadly. "Mocking a servant before the eyes of the court? Or questioning my judgment in who is permitted to stand in my presence?" The silence deepened. Varenne paled, dropping into a trembling curtsy. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I misspoke." Kyle's gaze did not soften. "You did more than that. You revealed cruelty, and I have no tolerance for cruelty in my court." He turned then, his hand brushing Elara's arm, a fleeting touch, but deliberate. "Come," he said, his voice softer now. "You need not stand here." The crowd parted again as the prince led her away, the murmurs swelling like a storm. Elara's heart raced as she followed him, her thoughts spinning in chaos. When they reached the shadow of a quiet colonnade, she dropped into a hurried curtsy. "My lord, you should not have—" Kale's brows arched. "I will not stand idle while vipers bare their fangs at you." "But they will speak," she whispered. "They already do. You give them cause to believe." Her voice faltered. She dared not finish. Kyle stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "And what do you believe, Elara?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to tell him that she believed nothing, that she wanted nothing, but the words tangled in her throat, trapped between fear and a strange, dangerous longing. Kyle's eyes softened. "You fear the whispers. I understand. But let me be clear. Their whispers mean nothing to me." She shook her head quickly. "They should, my lord, for your sake, if not mine." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick with words unsaid. Finally, Kyle stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Very well, keep your distance, if that is what you wish. But know this," his voice lowered, "a promise and a warning all at once. I do not abandon what I choose to protect." And with that he turned, leaving her trembling in the lantern-lit shadows. By the next morning the palace buzzed with rumor. "The prince defended her. He touched her arm. Does she hold his eye?" Every corridor whispered her name. Every passing glance burned. Elara worked harder, kept her head lower, prayed to vanish into shadows, but the harder she tried to disappear, the clearer it became. Kyle had marked her with his protection, and the court would never let her forget it. And deep within her heart, buried beneath fear and denial, a dangerous truth flickered she did not want to forget. Chapter 4. Shadows of Conspiracy. The council chamber was thick with incense and tension. Lord Alistair leaned back in his carved oak chair, his rings glinting in the torchlight. His eyes, sharp as daggers, never left the prince who stood before the council table. "The treasury bleeds," Alistair intoned. "Merchants whisper of corruption, soldiers murmur discontent, and yet our crown prince spends his time defending maids." The last word dripped with venom. Kyle's jaw tightened. "You question my judgment, my lord. I question your priorities," Alistair countered smoothly. "The kingdom needs strength, resolve, not softness." A murmur of agreement rippled among the older nobles. The queen's lips thinned. The king remained unreadable, but Alistair's gaze flicked toward Seraphine, seated gracefully nearby. She met his eyes, and a silent understanding passed between them. The prince had a weakness, and they would use it. Later that night, Seraphine found herself in a shadowed corridor, the hem of her emerald gown whispering against the stones. Alistair awaited her, cloaked in black, his expression grim. "You see it, don't you?" he said without preamble. "The way he looks at her, the way he risks his name for her." Seraphine's nails bit into her palms. "A maid, a debt-born servant, daring to stand where I should be. He humiliated me once. I will not allow it again." Alistair's thin smile curved. "Then our goals align. You want the girl removed. I want the prince weakened. Together we can achieve both." Seraphine's eyes gleamed. "And how do you propose we do that?" "By using her. By turning his protection into his downfall. If the court believes she betrays him, if she is caught in some treachery, it will not be the maid who burns alone. It will be him." Seraphine exhaled slowly, satisfaction coiling through her veins. "Then let us sharpen the blade." Elara sought refuge in the palace gardens. It was late, the festival lanterns long extinguished, but moonlight painted the roses silver. Here she could breathe. Here she could pretend the world was not watching, not whispering. Her hands brushed the petals when a voice broke the silence. "You always choose the quietest corners." She startled, turning. Prince Kyle stood in the shadows, his cloak loose, his crown absent. He looked less like a prince and more like a man, tired, restless. "My lord," she whispered, bowing quickly. "Forgive me. I should not be here." "And yet you are," Kale interrupted gently, stepping closer. "Tell me, Elara, why do you hide?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to say she was only a maid avoiding chores, but his gaze left no room for falsehoods. "Because," she said softly, "I do not belong in your world. Every time you look at me, they sharpen their knives, and her voice broke, "I cannot protect you from them." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Kyle reached out, lifting her chin with 2 fingers. His eyes searched hers, steady, unyielding. "You think I need protection from whispers?" he asked. Her breath trembled. "They are not just whispers, they are weapons." Kyle's lips curved faintly. Then let them come. I have faced blades sharper than words. Something shifted then, an invisible thread pulling them closer. The night air thickened, the roses swayed, the world seemed to hold its breath. Elara pulled back, fear flashing in her eyes. My lord, this cannot be. You are bound to your duty. I am bound to chains. Kyle's jaw tightened, frustration sparking. Chains can be broken, but before she could answer, footsteps echoed on the gravel path. A pair of guards approached, bowing hastily. Your Highness, the council summons you. Kyle's gaze lingered on her, something fierce and unspoken burning in his eyes. Then he turned, vanishing into the night. Elara stood alone, her heart racing, her soul torn between fear and longing. The next morning, chaos rippled through the palace. Whispers flew, a stolen ring, a missing document, a servant's betrayal. Elara was scrubbing floors when two guards stormed into the hall. You, Elara, one barked. You are to come with us. Her heart lurched. What? Why? You've been named, the guard said curtly. For theft. Gasps erupted from the other servants. Elara's blood ran cold. I have stolen nothing, she cried. But even as the words left her lips, dread coiled in her stomach, for she remembered Seraphine's smile, Alistair's eyes, and she knew the game had begun. Chapter 5. The Fall into Fire. The clatter of armored boots echoed down the marble halls as Elara was dragged through the palace. Her wrists were bound in rough rope, her head bowed low. The servants she passed stared with wide eyes, some whispering, others smirking. She heard the words hissed like venom. Thief! Ungrateful wretch! Did she think the prince would protect her forever? Elara's throat burned, but she held her silence. To protest was useless. This was Seraphine's doing. She could see the noblewoman's shadow in every accusing glance, every cruel smile. The throne room was transformed into a courtroom. Nobles filled the benches, lords and ladies whispering like crows. At the far end sat the king and queen, their expressions carved from stone, and beside them Prince Kale. Elara dared not look at him. A herald's voice rang out, Elara of Duskfield, charged with theft of the royal signet ring and with unlawful possession of a sealed council document. Gasps swept through the room. The accusations were treasonous, enough to condemn her to death. Elara's knees weakened. She whispered hoarsely, It isn't true. Silence! The herald barked. Lady Seraphine stepped gracefully into the circle, her gown shimmering, her eyes bright with false sorrow. My lords, my ladies, she began, her voice honey smooth. It grieves me to speak against a fellow woman of the palace, but truth demands it. I myself saw Elara lingering near the council chambers, where no servant has leave to tread. When the ring went missing, I thought nothing of it, until I found her with this. She lifted a folded parchment, its seal broken. Gasps erupted again. A guard took it reverently, passing it to the king. A council decree, he confirmed. Stolen. Elara's heart stopped. She had never seen it before. Seraphine pressed a hand to her chest, feigning pity. I warned her once. That ambition beyond one's station is dangerous. But alas, she would not listen. The nobles murmured agreement. Their eyes pierced Elara like blades. At last, the herald turned to her. What say you, girl? Do you deny these charges? Elara raised her head, her eyes burning with desperate truth. I do. I have never touched the king's seal, nor stolen any ring. I am no thief. I am a servant, nothing more. Laughter rippled through the chamber. You expect us to believe? Alistair sneered. rising from his seat, that the ring vanished into thin air, that a sealed document leapt into your hands of its own accord? I don't know how they came to me, Elara cried, panic tightening her chest. But I swear upon my life I am innocent. For the first time, her gaze darted to the prince. Kyle sat rigid, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair, his eyes locked on hers, burning with conflict, fury, anguish. But he said nothing. Ilara's heart fractured. Why did he not speak? Why did he not defend her as he had before? Because this was no longer gossip. This was treason. If he sided with her, he would defy the council, risk his birthright. So he remained silent, and that silence cut deeper than any chain. The king's voice, grave and final, filled the chamber. Elara of Duskfield, the charges laid upon you carry punishment of exile or death. Yet as you claim innocence, the council must decide. The nobles erupted in debate, voices clashing like swords. Exile, death, make an example of her. She is the prince's distraction. Elara swayed, her knees buckling. The guards seized her arms, holding her upright as the chamber spun around her. Through the storm of voices, she heard a softer one, a whisper. Hold on. Her eyes flicked upward. Prince Kyle's lips had barely moved, his gaze fixed on her, but the words reached her like a lifeline. Hold on. The king raised his hand for silence. The chamber fell still. Tomorrow, at dawn, he declared, the council shall deliver its verdict. Until then, the accused will be held in the eastern tower. Elara's heart plummeted. The guards dragged her back, chains clinking, as nobles buzzed like hornets. And through the blur of faces, she saw Seraphine's smile, sharp, triumphant, merciless. But she also saw Kale, his jaw set, his fists clenched, and in his eyes, a fire that promised the storm was far from over. Chapter 6. The Prince's Defiance. The night was long and merciless. In the eastern tower, Elara sat on the cold stone floor, her wrists raw from chains. Moonlight filtered through the barred window, painting silver streaks across her face. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Tomorrow, at dawn, her fate would be sealed. She thought of her father, long gone, of her little brother, whom she had left behind in a village that could not remember her now. And then, against her will, she thought of him, Prince Kyle. Why had he been silent? Why had he let her drown in that sea of venomous voices? Her chest tightened. Perhaps she had been a fool to believe his kindness. His warmth had meant more. He was a prince, she was a servant. Their worlds could never join, and yet she remembered his eyes in the courtroom, the fury that burned there, the words whispered only to her, hold on. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the guards came. The iron doors groaned open, and Elara was dragged once more into the throne room. The chamber was packed, every noble and advisor gathered for the spectacle. The king sat in grim silence, his crown gleaming like fire. The queen's eyes, though kinder, remained distant. At their side, Kyle. His face was unreadable, but his jaw was clenched like stone. The herald stepped forward. The council will now deliver its judgment on Elara of Duskfield. The chamber buzzed with anticipation. Lord Alistair rose, his voice sharp as a blade. My king, the evidence is clear. The maid is guilty of treason. Mercy would be weakness. Let her death remind all that no servant, no beggar may play at power within these walls. Seraphine followed, her gown whispering against the marble. She bowed gracefully, her lips curved in false sympathy. Your Majesty, though it pains me to say so, exile would be too light a sentence. Betrayal must be answered with finality. Only death will preserve the crown's dignity. The chamber hummed with agreement. Ilara stood trembling, every word like a nail in her coffin. The king raised his hand. So be it. Let the council decide. No, the word cut through the air like thunder. Every head turned. Prince Kale had risen from his seat. His cloak flared behind him, his eyes blazing. No, he repeated louder now. I will not let this lie stand. This trial is a farce. The evidence manufactured, the witnesses corrupted, and the accused, his gaze locked on Ilara, fierce and unyielding, is innocent. The hall erupted. Your Highness, outrageous! Silence him, the king's voice thundered above them all. Kyle, do you understand what you are doing? Kyle strode forward, standing between Ilara and the court, his hand on the hilt of his sword. I understand perfectly. I am protecting truth. I am protecting her. Gasps rippled. Whispers flew like sparks. Her? Did he say her? Seraphine's face blanched, then twisted with fury. Lord Alistair sneered. My prince, do not disgrace yourself for a servant girl. She bewitched you, as the whispers say. You would throw away crown and honor for a maid's smile. Kale's hand tightened on his sword. His voice rang clear. Better her smile than your poison, Alistair. Better her loyalty than your schemes. Murmurs erupted. Some nobles paled. Others exchanged startled looks. Alistair's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, Kale turned sharply toward Seraphine. And you, he spat, your hatred is as transparent as glass. You would frame an innocent woman, poison her reputation, and call it duty? Tell me, Seraphine, was it duty that placed the stolen decree in her chamber? Was it loyalty that forged a false trail to her hands? Seraphine froze, her lips parted, but no sound came. The room waited, breathless. Kyle stepped closer, his eyes ablaze. I know your games, and today they end. The chamber was chaos now. Some shouted for order, others for blood. But a few voices began to rise, hesitant, questioning. Could it be true? Seraphine framing her? Lord Alistair's ambition has always been suspect. The tide was shifting. The king's eyes darkened. He studied his son with a storm of fury and something else. Reluctant respect. Ilara of Duskfield, the king said at last, his voice measured. Until proof is found, your life shall be spared, but you remain accused. The council will deliberate further. It was not freedom, but it was not death. And it was Kale who had won her that chance. As guards moved to escort her back, Ilara stumbled, her strength nearly gone, but Kale was there, steadying her. His hand lingered at her elbow, his voice low enough only she could hear. I promised you, he whispered, I would not let them break you. Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. Why would you risk everything for me? Kyle's eyes softened, the fire within them gentler now. Because, Ilara, you are not nothing. You never were, and I will not stand by while they destroy the only woman who ever made me feel alive. Her heart stopped. For the first time, hope flickered in the darkness. Chapter 7. The Fall of Seraphine. The storm had broken. Whispers flooded the palace like a rising tide. Kale's defiance, Seraphine's trembling silence, Alistair's sneer, It had all planted doubt in the minds of lords and ladies who had once followed blindly. By nightfall, the council chamber had become a cauldron of suspicion, and Seraphine was at the center of it. Elara sat quietly at the far end of the chamber, still bound but no longer bowed. For the first time since her trial began, she felt the weight of despair lifting. Kyle stood beside her, not behind the council, not hidden in silence, but openly at her side. His presence was both shield and sword. Across the chamber, Seraphine's perfect mask was cracking. "My lords," she said, her voice too high, too hurried, "are we truly to believe the prince's baseless accusations? That I, loyal daughter of this realm, would sully my name with treason?" But the nobles did not murmur in agreement this time. They watched her with narrowed eyes. Lord Alistair leaned forward. "Careful, Lady Seraphine. Too much protest invites suspicion." She shot him a venomous glare. But Alistair himself looked strained, his confidence faltering. Then the great doors creaked open. All heads turned as an old man in servant's garb was led in by the guards. His hands shook, his eyes downcast. "Who is this?" demanded the king. Kyle stepped forward. "A witness, one who came to me last night, with fear in his eyes and truth on his tongue." The old man swallowed hard. "My lords, I am Master Rowan, keeper of the archives. I saw Lady Seraphine enter the sealed chamber 3 nights past. I thought perhaps she came on the Queen's business, but—" His voice trembled. "I later saw her hand parchment to Lord Alistair." A collective gasp swept the chamber. Seraphine surged to her feet. "Lies! He is nothing but a servant." Rowan's voice grew stronger. "Aye, my lady, and so am I. But stone has ears and ink does not forget. I keep records, and I copied the decree you stole." He held out a scroll. The broken seal matched the one Seraphine had waved in court. Kyle seized the moment. His voice thundered. "There! Proof that she and Alistair conspired. They forged accusations, framed Elara, and sought to weaken the crown itself." The nobles erupted in chaos. Seraphine's face drained of color. She turned desperately to Alistair. "Do something!" But Alistair's eyes had gone cold. "You played your part poorly," he sneered. "I should never have trusted you with so delicate a scheme." Her jaw dropped. You would betray me?" "Betrayal?" Alistair barked a laugh. "I only ever used you. You were a pawn, nothing more." The words sliced her like steel. The court watched in stunned silence as Seraphine, once the jewel of noble grace, crumbled before them. Kyle's blade rang free from its scabbard. "Enough!" His voice shook the chamber. He leveled the sword at Alistair. "You would betray crown and kingdom for power that was never yours to claim. You will answer for it," Alistair sneered. "Do you think steel will save you, boy? Half this council longs to see you fall." But no hand rose in his defense. One by one, the nobles turned their faces away. The tide had shifted. The king's voice rang out like thunder. "Seize them both!" Guards surged forward. Seraphine shrieked, clawing, weeping, her mask gone completely. Alistair fought, but Kyle's blade met his in a clash that rang through the hall. Steel flashed, sparks flew. At last, Kyle's sword pressed to Alistair's throat, "Yield," he growled. The traitor spat on the marble floor, but his strength was broken. The guards tore him down, dragging him away beside a sobbing Seraphine. The hall fell silent, save for the crackle of torches. The king's face was carved from stone, but his voice carried weight. "Let it be known, the council has seen treachery unmasked. Lady Seraphine and Lord Alistair will face trial for conspiracy against the crown." His gaze shifted to Alara, still standing in chains. His tone softened, though pride kept his face hard. "And the maid who was accused unjustly shall be freed." Gasps rose again. Ilara's knees buckled as the chains fell from her wrists. She stood trembling, hardly able to believe it. And Kyle was already at her side, his hands steadying her, his eyes fierce with something more than triumph. As the court slowly emptied, Kyle turned to her. "It's over," he said softly. "They cannot touch you now." Alara's lips parted, her heart racing. Why would you risk everything? Your crown, your future? Kyle's gaze burned into hers. "What is a crown if I cannot choose the woman who stands beside me?" Her breath caught. For the first time, there were no chains, no guards, no whispered rumors between them. Only two souls, scarred but unbroken, standing in the ruins of a fallen scheme, and something new, fragile and fierce, growing in its place. Chapter 8. The Queen. From the ashes, the palace never slept. Even after the trial, after Seraphine and Alistair were dragged away in chains, whispers still flowed through the corridors like restless ghosts. Servants exchanged wide-eyed looks, nobles gathered in hushed clusters. But in the quiet of her chamber, no longer a prison cell but a guest chamber overlooking the royal gardens, Alara finally sat in stillness. Her wrists were free, yet her heart still trembled. Freedom had been given to her, but what did it mean? She was still a servant. She had no family name, no fortune, no claim to anything within these golden walls. And yet, the prince's words echoed within her, steady as a heartbeat. "What is a crown if I cannot choose the woman who stands beside me?" Her hand pressed to her chest. Could it be true? Could he truly mean her? The next morning, the throne room filled once again, not for judgment this time, but for proclamation. The king sat on his throne, the queen at his side, their faces regal yet shadowed with uncertainty. The council gathered, murmuring about what was to come, and at the center stood Kyle. He wore the armor of state, polished steel and crimson cloak, yet there was no mask of politics on his face, only fierce, unshakable resolve. Alara stood to one side, her hands folded nervously. She wanted to disappear, yet every eye in the chamber seemed fixed on her. Kyle's voice rang out, "My lords, my ladies, yesterday truth was revealed, treachery unmasked, but there is more yet to be spoken, more yet to be claimed." The chamber fell silent. "I will not allow lies to shape my future, nor will I allow love to be cast aside for the sake of politics. You speak of bloodlines, of duty, of alliances, but I speak of truth, and the truth is this." He turned, his gaze locked on Alara. "That the woman I choose is she." Gasps filled the air. Nobles rose to their feet. Some shouted in outrage, others in disbelief. "A servant? Impossible! This is madness." But Kyle raised his hand, silencing them with sheer will. "Yes, a servant, a woman who stood accused, yet did not bow to despair, a woman who faced chains and scorn, and yet held her head high. A woman whose courage shames half this court. She is more worthy of the crown than any who covet it. His words echoed like thunder. Ilara's knees weakened. She stared at him, wide-eyed, her breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered, though her heart cried yes. "You cannot, Kyle. You cannot mean this." But he stepped toward her, closing the space, his voice softer now, though it carried to every corner of the hall. "Ilara, from the moment I first saw you, I knew you were not what you seemed, not a servant, not a shadow, but fire hidden in plain sight. You gave me truth when all others gave me flattery. You gave me defiance when all others bowed. You gave me hope when I had none, and I will not spend another day denying what my heart has already chosen." His hand extended. "Stand with me as my equal, as my queen." The chamber erupted again, half in outrage, half in awe. For a long, terrible moment, all waited for the king's wrath. But it was the queen who rose. Her gaze rested on Ilara, sharp yet kind. "Child, step forward." Ilara's legs trembled as she obeyed. The queen studied her in silence. Then, slowly, she smiled. "I see it," she murmured. "Strength, humility, and a fire no crown can dim." She turned to the king. "Perhaps it is not blood that makes a queen, but spirit." The king's jaw tightened. He looked from his son to Ilara, his face unreadable. At last, he exhaled. "So be it. If my son's heart will not be swayed, then let it be tested. Ilara, Maid of Duskfield, you shall walk the path to the throne. Let the court bear witness." The uproar turned to stunned silence. Kyle's hand closed around hers, warm and unshakable. Ilara's tears fell freely now. "I am not worthy," she whispered, but Kyle shook his head. "You are. You always were. You only needed to believe it." And for the first time she did. The council, the whispers, the chains, all of it faded. What remained was the man before her, the truth between them, and the path they would walk together. Weeks later, the kingdom gathered in the great square for the coronation. The people cheered as the crown prince ascended the dais, his hand clasped with Ilara's. No longer a maid, no longer a prisoner. She wore the royal gown, the fabric flowing like starlight, her eyes bright with tears. When the crown was placed upon her head, the crowd roared, some in disbelief, some in joy, but none could deny the sight before them. Ilara, once sold as a servant, now stood as queen, and when Kyle turned to her, his voice steady, his vow eternal, she knew this was not a dream. "You were never mine to save," he whispered. "You were only mine to love." Their lips met as the kingdom cheered, the ashes of the past swept away by the fire of a new dawn.